the 19th century. They are even more important for us nowadays. So I decided when I was reading the Spirit of Prophecy, I was just praying that the Lord would open my eyes to give me inspiration how to translate what I was reading into research and into the current scientific language, basically. And God did. I didn't know how to find funding. I didn't know how to run the studies. But God gave this desire, put this desire into my heart, and it's become my passion. And it's very rewarding, to see how many people we are able to reach through this research. Not everyone will be willing to read the Spirit of Prophecy, but this is just a little stepping stone. You show them the science behind, and you can say just, a little sentence. And do you know that, Ellen White was writing about this, back 150 years ago? And this just, is thought-provoking, and this might be a small stepping stone for someone who doesn't believe in the Spirit of Prophecy to start reading it. So that's how I received God's calling to do this work, and I'm very passionate about it. I'm very excited to be a part of God's work. Amen. And we have an exciting topic for this afternoon, how to reset our body clock with nutrition. So let's start with the definition. What is our body clock? What is it? So it's a tricky question. We have more body clocks than just one. We have a master clock in our brain that's entrained by the light and darkness cycle. But we also have a peripheral body clock in each cell of our body. In each organ, there's, in each cell of our body, there's a peripheral body clock. Now, this peripheral body clock needs to be aligned to the master clock in the brain. And that's done through nutritional cues, like the cycling of feeding and fasting, and also through the composition of the diet that we're eating. So the master clock is entrained by light and darkness, but the peripheral clocks are aligned to the central clock through nutritional cues like fasting and feeding and the composition of the diet. This is just to show you that the body clocks are important for all kinds of things. They're important for our metabolism, for the regulation of lipid metabolism and glucose metabolism, and we are talking about circadian rhythms that are about 24 hours long in our body. And when there's a disruption, metabolic disturbances are a result. A good example is a higher risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes in shift workers. This experiment took healthy volunteers, and they put them on 3 days of day work and then on 3 days of shift work, night work. And these healthy volunteers were becoming pre-diabetic during the night shifts. So they had to stop the experiment. Their beta cell function decreased. Their ability to produce insulin decreased. They were in the pre-diabetic range. So this just demonstrates that it's important to respect God's law. When there's day, we should be working. When there's night, we should be sleeping. We're not always able to do that with our jobs. We just need to do our best. This is melatonin. that has pleiotropic positive effects. It's involved in the regulation of circadian rhythms, but it's also involved in immunomodulation, in regulation of mitochondrial functions. It has antioxidant functions, anti-cancer effects. It stimulates brown fat. It has cardioprotective effects and also anti-aging properties. Now, how can we get a lot of melatonin? There's, melatonin supplements that are in pharmacy stores, but can you get the same benefits from the pills? No. What is the most natural way how to get your melatonin? When you sleep. So the production of melatonin is the highest at night. When it's getting dark, we need to be getting ready for bed. And if we're getting ready for bed at 2 a.m., then our production of melatonin will be only about half of what we would get if we went to bed at 9 or 10. Do you remember the quote from the Spirit of Prophecy that 1 hour of sleep before midnight counts as 2 hours after midnight? And this is the scientific background. So we're missing out. If we are late owls, we're missing out on melatonin that has so many positive metabolic effects. Now, melatonin levels are lowered in diabetes. So the nocturnal rise is dampened in diabetes, particularly in people with diabetes that already have diabetic complications. This is a busy slide. It's just to show you that the clock genes, the peripheral clock, the clock genes are real. So there's a whole family of clock genes. Some of them are even named as clock, but some of them have different names. You don't need to remember the names. This is just to show you there's a whole family of genes that are called the clock genes, and this is the peripheral clock in each cell of our body. Now, these clock genes are being activated by fasting and exercise, but in a different way, they are being suppressed when we eat a meal. So fasting and eating are the main triggers how to promote the expression of clock genes and regulate them. Now, the clock gene expression is dampened in diabetes. We saw in the other slide that the patients with diabetes have lower levels of melatonin, but this is at the cellular level. So each cell of our body, if you have diabetes, expresses the clock genes to a lesser extent compared to a healthy person. Now, this study, the researchers took muscle biopsies from people who were lean and trained, so they were exercising, physically active, then lean people who are untrained, who are just sedentary, obese people, and people with type 2 diabetes. And you can see the amplitude of the clock gene expression. So, how much the variation the variation in expression during the day. And you can see a clear trend. The diabetics were the worst off, but of course, being lean and also physically active was the best. And the obese and untrained were somewhere in between. Now, it's not only about, you don't need to get diabetes to get some disturbances in clock gene expression. A simple experiment where the researchers delayed breakfast by only 3 hours after getting up showed that the delayed breakfast also delayed the expression of clock genes in the adipose tissue. So it's a completely remote area, but the clock genes expression was delayed in the adipose tissue after a delayed breakfast. A Western type of a diet that's high in fat and high in sugar also disrupts the expression of clock genes, and the clock gene expression is also delayed compared with a high carbohydrate diet. So of course a Western type of a diet regulates our metabolism in a different way compared with a Mediterranean diet that's a lot more plant-based. Also, fasting has been shown to influence the clock gene expression. This is a study done in people who were observing Ramadan, where people don't eat anything during the day, and then they have a big feast after sunset. Now, this way of eating was suppressing the clock gene expression substantially. On the other hand, if you just limit a little bit your caloric intake compared to a Western diet, you will get these nice peaks in clock gene expression. And what's the most natural way how to limit your caloric intake? Eat more vegetables, right? They are very low in calories. So if you have a big salad, for example, that's a natural way how to limit your caloric intake. So it's about meal timing, but also meal frequency and about meal composition. And we will try to put these pieces together during our presentation. Intermittent fasting has been shown to be an efficient way for weight loss and decrease the risk of type 2 diabetes. And even in people with type 2 diabetes, for their glycemic control, it's beneficial to eat larger meals rich in fiber compared with more smaller meals during the day. Intermittent fasting has also effects on our gut microbiota, and it affects the quality of our sleep, and it also affects our choices in terms of our diet, and it determines our level of exercise and activity. So all these regulate our metabolism and may be beneficial for the treatment and prevention of obesity, type 2 diabetes, but also cancer and cardiovascular disease. Now, just a simple example. How can you reset your body clock when you're traveling internationally, when you're changing the time zones? So let's say you're going to visit the beautiful city of Prague, which is 6 hours ahead from the East Coast, but 9 hours ahead from the West Coast. Which means if your flight is at 6 p.m., what time is in Prague already? Early in the morning in Prague, right? So what's the best way how to align your body clock to the Prague clock so that when you arrive, you don't need to spend several days in a hotel sleeping, but you can, explore the city and enjoy the beautiful city. How can you do that? So one of the best ways, one of the fastest ways is to align your clock even before you depart. So it's early in the morning in Prague, which means you need to skip dinner in order to tell your body, now it's not day, it's night, I need to get some sleep, I'm not eating. And then when you arrive in Prague, it's morning, so you get a big breakfast in Prague, and that's one of the fastest way how to align your body clock when you're traveling. But we don't need to align our body clock with nutrition only when we're changing the time zones. We need to do it every day. One of the questions is when to eat. When is there any better time to eat than another time of the day? There's some fascinating research on this. When you eat the same meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the metabolic effects are not the same. You deposit the most fat in the evening from the same meal compared with the same meal eaten as breakfast or as lunch. And the lowest fat deposition is after breakfast. You're able to metabolize your breakfast more readily than your lunch and your dinner. People who regularly consume breakfast are usually leaner than those who skip breakfast, even though the overall caloric intake may be higher in those who consume breakfast. So it's not only about calories. We were talking about the composition of the diet in our last lecture. Now we're talking about how to distribute your meals during the day. And breakfast is the most beneficial meal that you can consume in the day. In one study that targeted weight loss, and involved more than 400 people for 20 weeks, compared people who were early eaters, who were rising up early but also starting their breakfast early and finishing their meals early, compared to late eaters who were just shifted. They woke up, had their breakfast at work, at almost lunchtime of the early eaters' time, and then they were also finishing their meals later. And the early eaters were losing more weight compared to the late eaters. Now, this study showed that our carbohydrate, our ability to burn carbohydrate is the highest in the morning because our insulin secretion is the highest in the morning. Which means if you're eating meals rich in carbohydrates, like your oatmeal, for example, the best time to eat it is in the morning. This study from Harvard University showed that eating breakfast is protective against getting diabetes by 20 to 40%. And we're not talking about the breakfast composition. This takes, all Americans into account. So it includes people who are eating bacon and sausage and eggs for breakfast, as well as those who are eating their oatmeal for breakfast. Just eating breakfast was protective against getting diabetes. Now, this is the same study from Harvard University. They also looked at the meal frequency and eating breakfast. So this leaves us with 4 groups of people. Eating breakfast, yes or no, and then eating 1 to 3 meals per day, or eating 4+ meals a day, snacking during the day. So which group, if we have eating breakfast and eating 1 to 3 meals per day as our reference, which group will be the worst off? So we already know that breakfast is beneficial, so we know it will be skipping breakfast, right? No breakfast will be bad. And in which combination? Skipping breakfast with how many meals per day was the worst? Combined with snacking was the worst. That almost doubled the risk of getting diabetes in this particular study. Now, breakfast has been shown to be important, particularly for people with diabetes, which may be counterintuitive. You may think, well, if I have diabetes, if I skip breakfast in the morning, that means my body doesn't need to produce insulin, and I may be able to control my blood sugar better. But it's not the case. In fact, if you're skipping your breakfast, then your blood sugar control will be worse by about 20% during the whole day. And it's due to a lower secretion of insulin and also lower secretion of your incretin hormones in the gut. So skipping breakfast in type 2 diabetes increases your sugar, your post-meal sugar levels by 37% after lunch and by 27% after dinner. So we're talking about the second and the third meal effect. You know, skipping breakfast does not have only immediate consequences on your blood sugar if you have diabetes. It also affects your blood sugar control after your lunch and dinner. And this study showed that healthy people, if they skip breakfast, it influences their metabolic flexibility. So a metabolic flexibility is our ability to switch between the fuel, the main fuel. When we're fasting, our main fuel is our fat. But when we eat breakfast, our main fuel should be carbohydrate from the meal. This is called the metabolic flexibility. We're able to switch, between the fuels based on availability. However, if healthy people are skipping breakfast, they become metabolically inflexible. So they're less able to switch from burning fat, as in the fasting state, to carbohydrate after a meal. So, it has metabolic consequences. Even if you don't have diabetes, you still need to eat your breakfast because it's important for your metabolic health. So do we need to eat breakfast every day? Yes, absolutely. What if you're not hungry for breakfast? Well, my next question will be, what did you have for dinner? Maybe everything was vegan, maybe everything was healthy, but maybe it was just too much food, right? So if you want to be hungry in the morning, you want to limit your dinner. If you skip dinner completely, you will be enjoying your breakfast even more. This led me to the thought for patients with diabetes. It's been recommended to people with diabetes to eat many small meals during the day and to snack. And we saw in the Harvard study that this was not the best recommendation based on the observational data. So I thought, we need to do an interventional trial comparing 6 small meals during the day, according to the current recommendations, compared to only 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch, with the same caloric intake, with the same dietary composition. So we did the study. We even designed the cover on the Diabetologia journal, where the study was published. And it was a crossover trial. That means that each participant tried both regimens for 12 weeks. So one group started with 6 meals a day, and then after 12 weeks, they switched over to 2 meals a day. The other group started with 2 meals a day and then switched over to 6 meals a day. 2 meals a day consisted of breakfast and lunch, and 6 meals a day of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks in between and second dinner. That's the usual regimen for people with diabetes, right? Now, our participants' mean age was 59 years. About half of them were men, half of them were women. The mean diabetes duration was 8 years. The diet was the same during both regimens. We encouraged people to include a lot of fiber, a lot of plant foods. However, they were not completely vegetarian on this diet in this particular study. They were just encouraged to consume a lot more fiber than they were used to. And we were also measuring the fat content in the liver. Why is it important how much fat you have in your liver? Non-alcoholic steatohepatosis, or fatty liver disease. What does it mean? If you have fatty liver, it increases also your risk of cirrhosis, obesity, diabetes, but also of cardiovascular disease. So it has, many metabolic consequences. So we were using a magnetic resonance spectroscopy to measure the fat content of the liver. Now, the diet and the caloric intake were the same on both regimens. So how do you think both of the regimens compared? People were losing about 5 pounds on 6 meals a day. How much do you think they were losing on 2 meals a day? About the same? The diet was the same? Or were they losing more or less? So who thinks they were losing the same? Nobody. How about they were losing less on 2 meals a day? Who thinks they were losing more on 2 meals a day? Excellent, yeah, good job. They were losing almost 2 times more on 2 meals a day. So I will show you the results comparing the changes after 6 meals a day, A6, and 2 meals a day, B2. If the columns are going down, it's a decrease. So we can see a decrease in body weight. That means they lost weight in both groups. However, you see they lost more weight on 2 meals a day. They also lost more liver fat on 2 meals a day. The insulin sensitivity, the way how body responds to insulin was improved, was increased on 2 meals a day more than on 6 meals. The glycemic control improved on both regimens. Fasting plasma glucose and fasting insulin decreased more on 2 meals a day, which is a positive finding. In patients with type 2 diabetes, the fasting insulin is too high, and then they are not able to secrete after the meal as much as they need to. So decreasing their fasting insulin is a good finding. And then you want to increase their post-meal insulin secretion. What was really surprising was we were also measuring the quality of life and the depressive symptoms using Beck Depression Inventory. And the depressive symptoms were reduced more on 2 meals a day. Our patients didn't have any clinical depression. However, we know that diabetes increases your chances of getting depression over the course of life. So reducing the depressive symptoms was a really great finding. And to many of you, it may be shocking that the hunger feelings were reduced on 2 meals a day. So the main argument about, why not to eat 2 meals a day is mostly, I will be so hungry, I will just not be able to do it. But the fact is, if you get full, if you have 2 meals where you get satisfied, it's pretty easy compared with 6 meals where you're like constantly hungry, basically, because the meals are so small, you never get full. So it's easier to follow a 2-meal day regimen compared with 6 meals. A small example, before the world's oldest man died at the age of 114, Walter Bräuning attributed his longevity to also eating just 2 meals a day and working as long as he could and always embracing change. So let's look at some of the mechanisms behind the intermittent fasting. eating 2 meals a day means intermittent fasting on a daily basis, right? You can do fasting in many different ways. You can fast 1 day a week, or you can fast several days each month. But it's like with exercise. You know, if you get some exercise every month, you know, if you get some strenuous hiking once a month, it's better than nothing. However, if you can get your exercise every day, that's even better, right? And with fasting, it's the same. If you can introduce the intermittent fasting on a daily basis by eating 2 meals a day, that's even better than just fasting here a little bit and here and there. The clock genes are involved in the regulation of our metabolism and also in the regulation of our brown fat. Anyone remembers how we can activate the brown fat? So the main trigger how to activate our brown fat is cold exposure. So if you take cold showers in the morning, this is a way how to activate your brown fat. Another way how to activate your brown fat is exercise. And another one is fasting. And we were talking about some plant foods that can activate our brown fat. Anyone remembers? No, not onions and garlic, but it was L-arginine, the amino acid found in all beans, in all legumes, in all nuts and seeds. So, you know, a variety of plant foods can activate our brown fat. And also hot peppers and jalapenos that cannot be consumed in large amounts. Now, let's talk about the fasting and exercise that increases our AMPK at the cellular level. AMPK is an enzyme or an energy sensor of our cells. It's like a fuel gauge that tells our cells if we have enough energy or how is it looking with the energy stores inside the cells. And we want to keep the AMPK pretty high. And the good news is there are some natural ways how to activate our AMPK. There are some foods that can activate this energy sensor in our cells. One example is resveratrol in grapes, or green tea, curcumin, quercetin in red onions or elderberries or white onions or cranberries. Also ginseng, mulberry, and fiber in general. So all plant foods are able to activate our AMP kinase, this energy sensor in our cells. And it's also activated by exercise, caloric restriction, and fasting. Now, how many meals per day should we be eating? We were talking about the meal timing and about the importance of eating breakfast in the morning. But how many meals a day should we be eating? Snacking has been promoted as the main strategy how to lose weight and how to improve your glycemic control if you're diabetic. However, research has shown that eating more than 3 meals a day increases your energy intake overall and eventually leads to an increased risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Because snacking increases the food stimuli and also hunger and desire to eat. We're coming back to the study done at Harvard showing that snacking increased the risk of diabetes by 4 to 18%. Now, this is a fascinating topic, and I decided to study it in more detail in Loma Linda University, one of the blue zones where people live the longest and are the healthiest on Earth. We have something special. and I decided to learn some lessons from the Adventist Health Study 2, where we have more vegetarians than in general populations, but the plant-based diet is only able to explain about 50% of the age difference between Adventists and non-Adventists. So what are the other 50% due to? Of course, there are many factors that play a role. We know that keeping the Sabbath and giving our body the rest that we need on Sabbath is huge. It's also the social life and community-oriented life of service that has been shown to have benefits in terms of longevity. But I decided to look into meal timing and frequency specifically. So we were looking at changes in body mass index during the follow-up. You may be familiar, some of you may be the participants in the Adventist Health Study 2, so you may be familiar with the questionnaire. One of the questions was on meal timing and frequency. The participants were asked to list all the meals during the day they are eating, to mark the largest meal of the day, the smallest meal of the day, all other meals, and all snacks. And we analyzed data from more than 50,000 participants. The mean age was about 58 years, and the mean body mass index at baseline was 26.6. And we looked at the change in BMI, how people were gaining weight or losing weight during the follow-up. We were looking at meal frequency, the number of the meals they were eating, and also length of night fast, the gap between the last meal of the day to the first meal of the day. And also at meal timing, if people were consuming breakfast, yes or no, and also time of the largest meal. Were they consuming the largest meal in the morning, at lunch, or in the evening? And of course, as with other large cohort studies, you need to adjust for all the covariates. You know, you need to include the race and gender and smoking habits and education and socioeconomic status and other dietary and exercise habits. And our findings were quite striking. We observed a linear relationship between the number of the meals consumed per day and the changes in body mass index. Eating 3 meals a day was a reference group, and you can see that snacking increased your body weight during the follow-up, while eating only 2 meals a day was better than eating 3 meals a day. We also had a very small group of people who were eating only 1 meal a day, but you can see that the variability was very large. It was a small group, so I cannot draw, many far-reaching conclusions from this small group. I just included all the participants so that you can see the linear trend. So just to confirm, 2 meals a day were better than 3 in terms of body weight maintenance or body weight management. Consumption of breakfast was associated with better weight control compared with skipping breakfast. And the timing of the largest meal of the day was really important. The people who were eating their largest meal as breakfast were best off. And those who were eating their dinner as their largest meal had bigger problems maintaining their body weight. And also the length of night fast was important. Having a night fast of 18 to 24 hours. 18 hours is 2 meals a day eaten within 5 or 6 hours. So even the group eating 2 meals a day had this long night fast and was better off in terms of their body weight management. So do we need to eat any snacks in order to be healthy and in order to stay slim? No. I hope you are taking notes and you came up with these exact times when to eat your meals. Of course, I'm teasing. Of course, we're not able to give you specific times when it's the best to eat. However, we do have some general guidelines. It's important to eat your breakfast. If you can skip dinner completely, you will have even better metabolic outcomes. And you don't need to eat any snacks. So 2 to 3 meals per day are the best for metabolic health. It's also because between 6 and 10 p.m., most of the diets go completely wrong. So just to summarize our talk, we have 2 body clocks. One is our master clock in the brain, entrained by the light and darkness cycle, and peripheral body clocks in each cell of our body. And these need to be synchronized. These need to be aligned through the timing of our meals, and also frequency, and also dietary composition. In terms of dietary composition, we can encourage everyone to eat whole plant foods that activate brown fat, activate the AMP kinase, and bring all the metabolic benefits. And our insulin secretion is the most efficient in the morning. So if you can make your breakfast the largest meal of the day, the better for your metabolism. In terms of meal frequency, eating 2 to 3 meals a day is the best, with no snacks in between. In terms of meal timing, eating breakfast is important. It's protective against weight gain, and try to make breakfast the largest meal of the day, which brings us to the ancient proverb: eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. Or, as the Bible says, blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. So I'd like to encourage all of you to reset your body clock each day. It's an amazing mechanism that God put into each cell of our body. And it is our privilege to learn about these mechanisms and to be aligned with God's law. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Let's just wait for the mic so that everyone can hear the questions.
What about type 1 diabetics? You didn't address that. Of course, there are much less of those, but do you have some wisdom there as far as these things?
I'm not aware of any studies looking at meal timing and frequency in patients with type 2 diabetes. However, I do have several patients who went on 2 meals a day, even with type 1 diabetes. If your meals are rich in fiber, you don't need to be afraid of going on 2 meals a day, even with type 1 diabetes.
Thank you.
It may not be doable for everyone. You know, we need to be wise when trying it out. But you know, it's definitely worth trying, because it can also reduce the insulin requirements for type 1 diabetics.
My question is, a lot of people feel that children must snack. Can you address that a little? Because they're doing it in schools, they're doing it in little events, And if they don't need to snack, what do you suggest they might do to help these children?
Right, it's an excellent question. As children are getting older, the periods between meals are getting longer, right? A newborn needs to be fed every 3 hours or so, but at the age of 3, children are able to be on 3 meals a day. However, it's very difficult to give any general recommendations. It's better for the children to have some periods of fasting between the meals, but every family needs to find out, how to make it work. Some people ask about 2 meals a day for small children. This is probably a fine line. We're talking about metabolic benefits for adults, and as children are still growing, they still need to get more energy from the meals. So, it's probably wiser to keep the evening meal, the dinner for children. And you can always, they can always skip it when they're not hungry. But if they are hungry, I would suggest giving them the dinner.
I have a question. You had a slide up there, I think it was 1, 2, 3. The 4th slide, is there any way you could put that back up there so we could have a picture of it?
Sure.
While you're going there, just in regards to the children and 2 meals a day, it was a number of years ago that I ran across a quote in Spirit of Prophecy indicating that children as young as 2 years of age can handle 2 meals a day. And in our family, in transitioning, we've had 7 children. We found that they can handle 2 meals a day from 18 months on. You just have to make sure that their meals have a higher fat content than the adult meals, so they can tolerate more fat and more protein content than the adult meals.
Yeah, if the whole family is on 2 meals a day, then the children have good examples. On the other hand, the question was also about the social pressure. I don't think there's a universal answer to this. I think we need wisdom. There are some priorities, these need to be well balanced. So, this one? Okay. By the way, I gave my presentation to Cindy, so you're welcome to ask her for a copy. You don't need to take pictures. I'm happy to share all my slides with you.
I had a question regarding snacking. A lot of times people will say, you do a diet history with them and they say, oh, well, I barely eat anything. I'm just here and there. I don't have big meals. And it just sounds like they're not really, it would seem from what they say that their caloric intake is a lot lower than people who are eating larger meals. And yet, the studies suggest that these people, like you said here, they have higher energy intake, leads to more obesity and risk of type 2 diabetes. So what is the mechanism by which these people who are snacking, they're gaining weight more, they're getting more calories? Is it that they just don't realize how much they're eating during the day and snacking, and they think they're not, but they're constantly snacking, and their stimulus for getting more calories is greater, or how does that work? To be able to explain it to them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's one of the mechanisms. People tend to underestimate what they were eating because they still feel hungry. They think, well, I didn't have a full meal. I didn't eat until I was satisfied. And they are running hungry the whole day, snacking the whole day. And from your own experience, when you're hungry, also the quality of the dietary choices you make may suffer. You may go for some snacks that are not as healthy, that are packed with energy. So that's one of the mechanisms. But the studies that compared even healthy snacks with eating only 3 meals a day showed that eating even healthy snacks increases our hunger feelings and our desire to eat. So the more often we eat, the more we stimulate, the desire to eat.
Follow-up question to that then is, when they're eating the healthy snacks, were they still eating fewer calories than when they were eating meals?
No, the studies show that, they're just underestimating what they're eating.
Okay.
Because they feel hungry, so they are like, I didn't eat much, I only ate this, but I ate 6 times,
right.
Like half of the meal. That just adds up, and also I made some poor dietary choices that added up to being more.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions? Ricky?
The question on brown fat, is it only taking cold showers, or can I expose my skin to the cold as well? And in the northwest over here, can I go exercising, getting exercise, which also helps the brown fat, and exposing my skin to...
Absolutely. So praise God for the winters, because that's God's way how to activate our brown fat. It should be non-shivering thermogenesis. So if you're shivering, then you're too cold. So you need, like when it's very cold, you need to dress up a little bit. But generally speaking, a light layer of clothing might be enough if you're exercising in the fresh air. And that's the most efficient way how to stimulate your brown fat. Another question over there.
Do you have anything on if people are insulin resistant and have higher insulin levels, does that make it harder for them to lose weight? And what's the mechanism of that?
It does. And now the question is how to decrease the insulin resistance. One of the ways is to change the dietary composition. We were looking at the fatty acid composition in the cell membranes, remember, as one of the main mechanisms behind insulin resistance. So if we don't consume any animal products, then the insulin resistance drops within a few days. The changes are pretty quick. And of course, it's an ongoing process. So, the insulin resistance keeps dropping. So the dietary composition is one of the main things we need to focus on. Exercise is another one that can decrease the insulin resistance. Meal timing and frequency is also important. The insulin sensitivity increased more on 2 meals a day in our study with patients with diabetes compared with 6 meals a day, even with the same amount of energy and the same diet.
I think sleep also affects it.
Absolutely. Vitamin D and getting enough sunlight, that's another important.
And I wanted to ask about quality of sleep and insomnia, if you've studied any effects of decreasing meal frequency and the effect on sleep.
So if we eat only 2 meals a day, if we skip dinner, we can produce more melatonin compared to eating 3 meals a day. If you decide to have an evening meal, you want to keep it at least a few hours before bedtime. And you want to keep it very light. It may just be a salad, for example. And if you decide to skip the evening meal completely and be on 2 meals a day, you are able to produce more melatonin, because the melatonin will not only be produced in your brain, it will also be produced in your gut. That's fasting. So you really bump up your melatonin secretion. Which means you also wake up more rested in the morning, among other benefits that you're experiencing.
So is the melatonin that's produced in the gut made by the microbiome, or is it made by our own cells again?
It's by the neuroendocrine cells in the gut.
Okay. Same as in the brain, really.
Well, it has the same beneficial metabolic effects.
Yeah. Okay.
Question on the snacking issue. If we make it more fiber, plant-based, versus when we explore what are you snacking on, nuts and fruits, or dried, or maybe just an ounce or two of a legume of some sort for the snacking.
Right.
What impact does that have?
So, of course, the quality of our diet is important. However, if you snack, you disrupt the fasting cycle between the meals. So you're not disrupting the synchronization between your peripheral and the central clock. That's why it's not beneficial to snack, because of the disruption between the peripheral and the central clock that happens.
I had a couple quick questions. One is, what is the proportion or the comparison of how much melatonin is created in the brain versus in the gut? And the second one is, how do your peers respond to some of these findings that you're getting, specifically like over at PCRM, like when you're talking about 2 meals a day for diabetics and things like that, and also like when you go and you present to larger audiences that might not necessarily buy into your plant-based diet and some of these things that you're finding?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started presenting on plant-based diets in diabetes, the first few conferences were kind of scary. All the doctors were like, no, you cannot recommend a plant-based diet to people with diabetes. And over the years, it's been more and more accepted. And the American Diabetes Association has even invited me as an invited speaker to talk on 2 meals a day for diabetics. So, things are changing. We're living in an exciting time.
Amen. And then the proportion about the melatonin.
Yeah, the proportion between the melatonin secreted in our brain and in our gut, I'm not able to answer that question. So this is just, we have some limited amount of studies on this. It would be a great study to do.
Okay, about what percentage, if you're doing 2 meals a day, what percentage should you do on breakfast versus what percentage should you do on like your lunch or your early afternoon meal? And how do you base calorie intake? Is it per person?
Okay, that's a great question. So 2 meals a day, how do you divide up the caloric intake? So at least 50% should be eaten as breakfast, If not, 60. If you can eat 60% of your caloric intake, the better, because then lunch is a little bit smaller than breakfast. However, there's also some variability and flexibility. For some people, it may even work, 70% of the caloric intake for breakfast and 30% for lunch. But generally speaking, at least 50% should be consumed as breakfast. And then how do you determine the caloric needs? Well, you don't really need to count calories. If you have a variety of plant foods, then you don't really need to count calories, you don't need to count carbs. It's pretty easy, actually. People, even in our study, in the beginning, our study participants were scared. They were like, I don't know how I'm going to survive the 2 meals a day. And then they were amazed. They were like, I'm sticking to it, even after the study. This is amazing. I don't feel hungry, I don't need to count carbohydrates. I don't need to carb calories. It's just easy and simple.
My patients don't seem to have time to do everything that I recommend. So with regard to exercise, I know that there are some studies that indicate that exercising the 20 minutes immediately following the meal allows us to use the GLUT4 pathway. Is that more effective, or if they can only do one, would it be more important to do the what I call conversational paced walking after the meal, or to do some formal exercise routine?
Yeah, so exercise in any form is beneficial. However, it has been shown that if people with diabetes can do a short walk after each meal, this has better effects on their glycemic control. But it needs to be after each meal. So if you can encourage them to have a 10 or 15-minute walk after each meal, that's better than exercising only at one sitting. However, they will benefit also from any exercise, even if they exercise in the morning before the meal, that also increases the insulin sensitivity. However, for their glycemic control, a short walk after each meal is better.
I was just going to say at our retreat, when we encourage people we take them on walks after every meal, and so that's a real selling point when we can try to convince them that perhaps 2 meals a day, because Mrs. White says not to push that on people, so we make it their decision. But we tell them all the benefits, and one of the benefits is you don't have to exercise 3 times a day now. You only get to exercise twice a day now.
Can you discuss intermittent fasting with a 2-meal a planned day as you're recommending versus what the world views as intermittent fasting, which usually is skipping breakfast and starting or breaking the fast later in the day?
Yeah, there are many ways how to introduce intermittent fasting, but we just combined all the research together. The importance of eating breakfast, eating 2 to 3 meals a day, and if you're able to eat 2 meals a day, you're introducing intermittent fasting on an everyday basis. I'm not saying that skipping breakfast will not give you any metabolic benefits. However, I'm just presenting the best way based on the knowledge I have.
Have you done any studies, and you're probably aware of others who have, in terms of intermittent fasting preventing dementia?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That would be a longer-term study. It's a great idea. I haven't seen any study like this. I think we might be able to analyze the data from the Adventist Health Study too, because the follow-up is pretty long at this point. So we could look at the risk of dementia based on the number of meals. That would be an excellent study. Thanks to everyone who's participating in the Adventist Health Study too. I mean, you see how beneficial it is to analyze the data and get the answers to the questions that we have.
Just kind of a curiosity question. Do you know of any data showing which is more preferable, fruit or vegetables for breakfast?
We should eat more carbohydrates in the morning than at lunch or in the evening. But if you decide to have a savory breakfast with vegetables and some whole wheat bread or whole rye toast and scrambled tofu, that's fine too. I mean, it doesn't have to be oatmeal every day. Right here.
How important is timing, or do you see with people you work with? I guess personally, I like 2 meals a day, but they've got to be well timed and the same every day, or else I end up with a shortage.
Right.
So 3 meals a day, especially for people that are very active. See a lot of active people on 2 meals a day.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, people should be informed, and they should be the ones who will make the decision how it's doable for them. For some people, it may be better to have the 3rd meal, but just make it the lightest meal of the day if you decide to keep the evening meal.
Yeah. Keeping the family together is sometimes important too.
Yeah. It's a decision that everyone needs to make, and there are many factors that need to be taken into account. But even the family time can be enjoyable, with some water and Bible reading. I'm just saying it's up to each one to decide how they want to do it.
Expanding on her comment with timing. I end up having 3 meals some days, 2 meals others. But I find the 2 meals more difficult when I eat breakfast before 7 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. Generally, for when you're talking 2 meals, are you what time frames? Because people eat and sleep at different times a day.
And there's also a large flexibility in this. So in our study, we had a time frame for breakfast between 6 and 10, and for lunch, the time frame was between noon and 4 p.m. So there's a large flexibility. Generally speaking, the earlier you start eating and the earlier you finish, the better. Mm-hmm. We know from the Spirit of Prophecy, Ellen White was eating her breakfast at around 7 a.m. and was having her lunch around 1 p.m. And she recommends 2 meals a day with 5 to 6 hours in between them.
Yeah, but like if you have lunch at noon,
right,
and then you have a set of meetings or whatever, and you get to bed at 9 or 10.
That's my usual schedule, and I'm not complaining about it.